Hello. We've been doing some thinking about time banking, so we've put together this presentation so we can share ideas and hopefully get some of your feedback. Our ideas come from three main places. First of all, from social care legislation. We set up Communuity Glue to help try and make personalisation work out as well as it could do in local communities, so we already knew a bit about that. We've been having some interesting conversations with Fiona Mullins from So Local, which is an organisation that she's set up to try and get time banking off the ground in Oxfordshire. And we've also been very interested by the report written by Ralph Broad for the Centre for Welfare Reform about local area coordination. Let's talk about these one at a time. So personalised social care services started in 2008 with an initiative by central government that would mean that everybody who was entitled to publicly funded adult social care services could ask for a personal budget instead of having services provided for them, and people would then buy their own support. But of course not everybody knows what support's out there or how to go about buying it, so the new role of support broker was invented. Last year we put together and delivered a course for people who'd got personal experience of using health and social care services who wanted to train as brokers, and this group of people have called themselves peer brokers. Now, we're not experts on local area coordination, far from it. All we've done is read the report, but as far as we can see, it has these basic four features, which is that it starts at the start, using information and advice to help people sort out their own problems. It asks honest questions about where people are and what they actually want to achieve instead of focusing on their illness or disability. It acts as a bridge between people and local communities, which encourages people to use the resources that are already there, only thinking of services as a last resort, and so it transforms the systems, getting better value for money out of the services that are there, and all of this is facilitated by a local area coordinator. We don't know much about time banking either, but this is how we understand it, that it's based in communities, so it could be communities of interest like people with long-term mental health needs, or it could be geographical communities. People do ordinary everyday things for each other, so shopping, giving people lifts and so on, so everybody can contribute, although some people are prepared to share specialist skills. So part of the joy of this is that everybody gets to give as well as getting to get, so that people aren't put in a position where they're just taking all the time, and the whole thing is facilitated by a time broker. On the surface of it, at least, these three different roles look quite similar. They all involve putting people in touch with other people who can help them, and to do that people need a good knowledge of what's available in their area, both the formal supports that might look like services and the informal kind of neighbourly supports that people might be prepared to provide. All three models seem to work with an aspiration to help people on their own terms instead of seeing them in terms of an impairment or illness, and all three want to support communities to help themselves rather than perhaps slightly paternalistically providing support from outside. I'd like to start thinking about how you draw these different roles together by looking at brokerage first. Some parts of the broker role are working really well. So one of the things that brokers are quite good at is persuading local authorities where the indicative budget is not actually enough to meet people's needs. And brokers are successful in working in a more person-centred way, so starting off with people's hopes and aspirations about where they want to go, rather than starting with their impairment or illness. But there are still some real problems. One of them is that it catches people at the wrong point, when they're at their most vulnerable, which is often the time in somebody's life where they least want to talk to a stranger, and when they least feel able to take control of their own lives. They want other people to help and look after them at that point. The broker's role is time limited, so the effort that you put in building up a relationship with somebody is wasted, because after you've completed the support plan you part company. The system's far too bureaucratic. Our partners in Age UK Oxfordshire now think that really the minimum amount of time per week that you can work as a broker is about half time, which makes it very difficult for people with health and social care needs who perhaps want to act as brokers for a small number of people and only want to work maybe 2 or 3 hours a week. It's very hard for brokers to develop the full range of specialist skills around, say, mental health or head injury, and still have a detailed local knowledge in sometimes what's quite a wide geographical area. And then there are a whole host of difficulties associated with self-directed support generally. One of the problems associated with self-directed support relates to the system for dividing out money, which is known as the Fair Access to Care Services Scheme, or FACS for short. It divides people's needs into critical needs, substantial needs, moderate and low needs, and the idea is that everybody gets services at the level that they need. Local authorities have historically funded services in different ways. So typically for people with low and moderate needs, they provided universal services like information and advice services that anybody could use. And then for people with critical and substantial needs, they've had access to specialist services. Since individual budgets were introduced, it's really only been people with critical and substantial needs who've actually been able to get a significant individual budget. And since the recession struck, many local authorities have effectively restricted funding to people with critical needs. An analogy for the critical part of services is the mountain peak. It's not good to get stuck on the mountain peaks for several reasons. One is because it's quite an isolating place to be. Critical services are often intensive home care services or hospital care or high-level residential care type services, and it's not good for people to find themselves isolated in those strange and lonely places. But it's also bad because it separates people from all the rich resources in the valleys and from other people within their communities. In this analogy, you could think of specialist support brokers as kind of high mountain guides. They might be very familiar with an individual mountain peak, such as specialist mental health or learning disability services, but they'd be very unlikely to know about all of the low-lying areas in all of the surrounding mountains. This is where the local area coordinators come in. They have the detailed knowledge of what's available in local geographic communities. Of course, this is only an analogy, and in reality people often have mild and moderate needs at the same time as critical and substantial needs in other areas. So for example, somebody who's perhaps quite frail and has difficulty getting around can also become depressed. So what that means is that there would be a need for brokers and local area coordinators to be involved at the same time. Time banking could be really useful for helping people at the tops or the bottoms of the mountains. So a time bank that's grown within a community of interest could start by working with people with mild and moderate needs. It could be, for example, people with mental health needs who are very often well, and during that period are very happy to provide support for other people in the same situation that they've been in, and the voluntary sector and other providers could help develop a framework for volunteers and carers to bank time, and if they wanted to then transfer it over to other people who are in need, or maybe save it up and use it themselves when they're unwell. Within geographical communities, again, you could build locally in a geographical area, and people may be able to start by providing basic neighbourly support to people with learning disabilities in their areas. Where there are specialist skills that are needed to support people, the voluntary sector and other providers could help people to develop those skills, so that in the end communities do become more resilient and more able to help themselves. So this process of building community resilience can be seen if you look at the system for social care and how it could change in the future. At the moment, most of the money gets spent on people with critical needs. They always have access to a broker if they want one, and very often the broker will set up a support plan that involves specialist providers. People with substantial needs may still get some money and they may have access to a broker, but it's unlikely that they'll be able to afford very expensive specialist providers, so they're more likely to work with general providers like care assistants who might help people to go shopping or to tidy their flat, take their drugs. Everybody has access to free services still. Of course, they're not free. They're commissioned centrally by local authorities and by the NHS. So typically those are voluntary and community centre services and a general practitioner. So you can look now at what would happen maybe if you brought time banking and local area coordination into the mix. Probably to start off with, it wouldn't really change the situation for people with critical and substantial needs, at least not to start off with. But maybe people with low and moderate needs would be able to pay into a time bank and maybe draw out of it. An important extra area, of course, is that people with no social care needs at all would also be able to benefit from the time bank, and in this case it would be genuinely free. In the long term, you'd hope to see some impact on people with substantial needs. Hopefully what would happen would be that people who had gained skills working with people with low and moderate need would feel more able to bank time by providing support to people with substantial needs. You'd also hope that by providing support to people at the right time, you would prevent people from moving from having low or moderate needs into having critical and substantial needs at all. And perhaps at this point, some of the money that is used to pay for care for people with critical and substantial needs could justifiably be diverted to pay for the whole system. So how could we start to move some of this forward in Oxfordshire? Well, the first stage would probably be to set up a time bank within a community of interest, for example, carers of people with learning disabilities. The time bank would start off by helping people to support one another with basic everyday tasks such as shopping or maybe transportation. The next stage would be to train peer brokers to act as time brokers within their own communities of interest. Fortunately, we already have the funding for peer broker training in the autumn of 2012 and the spring of 2013, and we plan to change the curriculum so that by the end of it, people may be able to act as time brokers as well as support brokers. And this would have a number of advantages for peer brokers. For one thing, it would enable them to work with people with low and moderate needs while they build up their confidence before perhaps starting to work with people with critical and substantial needs later on. Of course, we recognise that there will always be a need for paid specialist support brokers, particularly for people with critical and substantial needs. However, what we hope is that where peer brokers have a pre-existing relationship with somebody from within their own community of interest, the paid professionals will be able to act as kind of consultant to provide the specialist information and advice about how to put the support plan together. Fast forwarding into the future, we hope we'd have a system where people right across the spectrum from no needs through to critical and substantial needs would be able to get support that they need from within the local communities. And they'd have a number of routes to doing that. We continue to need paid specialist brokers for people with critical and substantial needs. Peer brokers would work with people with quite serious needs, but would also work with people at the lower end of the spectrum and sometimes people with no eligible needs at all. And local area coordinators would work with as many people as possible within their own communities. The next thing to do from our point of view is to pilot test this by setting up some time banks. There's already a time bank up and running in Cowley, but at the moment there isn't a paid worker, so we're trying to fundraise for a paid worker there. We also want to set up a time bank in one or more communities of interest. It would be really good if those communities of interest were well represented in Cowley. That way we could look at the connections between local communities and communities of interest and assess how useful time banks are in linking people up together. To start off with, Communuity Glue and So Local would be able to provide some sort of mentoring or management of the paid workers. However, we don't think that that will be enough on its own, so we're really interested to talk to people from a wide range of other organisations that might be able to provide some sort of leadership or sponsorship to help get this off the ground. And I'm thinking particularly of charities and third sector organisations that work mainly within communities of interest, and development workers and community workers who work mainly locally. Of course, this is only the beginning of a conversation, and we really genuinely would like to hear any ideas that this may have sparked off for you. You can let us know. Probably the easiest way is by email, info@communityglue.org.uk. If email's difficult for you, if you can get a message to us on that email address, we're happy to call you back by phone. Thank you very much.